The galaxy is an ocean of endless night where stars burn like scattered embers across a canvas of void. Among these distant lights, life clings to fragile worlds, each a lonely fortress against the cold. Yet no corner of this vast expanse is untouched by the drumbeat of war. From the core to the rim, conflict is as constant as the turning of the heavens, a rhythm older than memory and destined to outlast every empire. Here, battle is not an interruption of peace. It is the natural state of existence. The Imperium of Man sprawls across the stars like a wounded colossus, ancient and crumbling, even as it defends its dominion with iron will. For 10,000 years it has endured, a realm of uncounted billions bound together by faith and fear. The Emperor, a figure of godlike power who once strode among mortals, sits entombed upon his golden throne, neither living nor truly dead. His silent vigil keeps the nightmares of the void at bay, yet his presence is but a flickering flame against the storm. In the dark corridors of the Imperium's worlds, hope is a memory, and duty is the only creed that remains. But humanity is not alone. Beyond the borders of the Imperium, ancient powers stir, and alien empires rise and fall like tides. The Aeldari, once masters of a glittering civilization, now wander as haunted remnants of their own hubris. Their craft worlds drift through space like spectral arcs, carrying the last survivors of a people who tasted the fruit of godhood and found only damnation. From the coldest reaches of the void, the Necrons awaken immortal legions of living metal, casting off the dust of eons to reclaim the stars that were once theirs. To them, all other life is but a transient infestation. Yet the deadliest enemy lurks not in distant stars, but in the realm of thought itself. The warp and ocean of raw, shifting madness bleeds into reality, its storms shaped by mortal fear and desire. From its depths the ruinous powers rise, the chaos gods who feed upon suffering and corruption. Their demons whisper into mortal hearts, promising power while sowing decay. Even the most steadfast defenders of humanity cannot wholly resist the subtle pull of chaos, for it is born from the very emotions that define sentient life. The line between hero and heretic is thin, and the fall is always near. In this ceaseless struggle, even the mightiest champions are but fleeting sparks. Space Marines, genetically engineered warriors clad in ceramite and faith, stand as humanity's ultimate defenders, yet their victories are but moments in an eternal war. They fight not for triumph but for survival, knowing that every world saved today may burn tomorrow. Across the galaxy, mortal soldiers march into battles they cannot win, their lives offered to a cause that promises no end and no mercy. The galaxy knows no lasting peace, only the slow erosion of all things. Civilizations rise and crumble like sandcastles before an unending tide. Stars themselves will one day gutter and die, and in that final silence only the echoes of war may remain. This is the truth of the 41st millennium, that decay is inevitable, and even the brightest lights are fated to dim. Here, in the shadow of eternity, war is not merely fought, it is lived. And in the whisper of decay, the galaxy listens, waiting for the final, inevitable fall. Brother Captain Malchior moved through the ruins like a shadow of iron. His armor bore the scars of 100 campaigns, gouged and blackened where plasma and shrapnel had struck true. Dust swirled in the dying light of a blood-red sun, coating the broken stones of the once proud citadel. Each step echoed with the memory of screams, though the battlefield lay silent now. It was dead long since claimed by the cold. He had faced the unthinkable and prevailed, but today the quiet unsettled him more than any roar of war. The air carried an unexpected softness, At first, it seemed a trick of the wind, the faintest breath of something sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. Malchior paused, helm sensors sweeping, searching for the source. The fragrance clung to the edges of perception, neither wholly pleasant nor entirely foul. Beneath its sweetness lurked a subtle rot, a wet, cloying undertone that teased the edges of memory like soil turned after rain, like flesh before the flies arrived. His gene-forged senses sharpened, yet the smell only deepened, as though it drew strength from his attention. He had known the stink of death on countless worlds, the acrid tang of burning flesh, the coppery haze of blood thick in the air. This was different. This was patient, inviting. He felt it coil within his lungs with every breath, not choking, but soothing, as if some hidden part of him longed to inhale more deeply. A warmth spread through his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. It carried neither the sting of poison nor the alarm of a known contagion. Instead, it whispered of rest, of burdens eased and wounds forgotten. Malchior tightened his grip on his bolter. His mind, trained for decades to detect the snares of the enemy, whispered caution. Yet another voice, softer, almost tender, urged him to listen, to simply be. The ruins around him seemed to shift, the dying sun casting long amber shadows that swayed like slow-moving tides. For a heartbeat, he imagined he could hear the pulse of the world itself, steady and forgiving. He shook the vision away, but the fragrance lingered, stronger now, a sweet, sickly promise that pressed against his thoughts. It was neither wholly repulsive nor truly pleasant. It was inevitable, and as the first stars pierced the dusk above, Brother Captain Malchior understood that something unseen had found him, and that the whisper of decay had only just begun to speak his name. Sleep came fitfully, as though the night itself wished to keep him half awake. Brother Captain Malchior lay within the cold shell of his armor, its auto-senses dimmed to a quiet hum. The battlefield's ruins surrounded him like the bones of some ancient beast, yet his mind wandered beyond broken stone and lifeless dust. Dreams rose, heavy and damp, until the boundary between waking and slumber thinned to a pale, trembling veil. At first, there was only the sound of rain. It fell where no clouds lingered, a soft patter on unseen leaves. He could smell it, wet earth, rich and dark, carrying the same sweet taint that had haunted the twilight. Beneath the fragrance lay a warmth, deep and almost maternal, like the memory of a heartbeat heard before birth. He felt the tension in his war-scarred muscles ease, the ache of centuries softening as though distant hands had lifted a burden too long carried. Then the whispers began. They did not speak in words, not at first. They were the sigh of rotting wood in a forgotten forest, the gentle rasp of fungus spreading across damp stone. Their music wound through his thoughts with the patience of slow decay. When at last meaning came, it was not a language of command but of invitation. All things fade, the whispers seem to murmur. All wounds weep and heal in time. Why cling to pain when release waits in the quiet earth? Malchior's warrior's mind recoiled, a reflex honed by decades of resisting the lies of the warp. Yet the whispers carried no threat, no sharp talons of malice. They spoke instead of rest of a place where scars no longer burned, and the weight of duty could slip from weary shoulders. He saw, for a fleeting instant, the faces of brothers long fallen, smiling with a peace he had never known. Fear stirred beneath the comfort, a cold knot of dread. He had faced the demons of chaos and knew their cunning well, yet something within him hesitated, caught between revulsion and longing. The scent of sweet rot deepened, curling around his senses like a lullaby. The rain faded. The whispers ebbed to a silence more profound than any void. Malchior woke with a start, the taste of damp earth lingering on his tongue. The night was still, yet the echo of that gentle voice remained, promising a release he dared not name and a terror he could no longer ignore. Brother Captain Malchior had fought through centuries of unending war, yet the night after the whispers his spirit felt heavier than any weight his armor could bear. Dawn came as a grey smear over the horizon, light without warmth, revealing a landscape of ruin that mirrored the quiet ruin within. He stood amid the shattered city, its towers like blackened teeth gnawed down to stubs, and the silence pressed upon him as if the world itself mourned. The scars of battle were not only on stone and flesh. They lay hidden in the mind, etched deeper than any wound. Malchior remembered every face he had failed to save, civilians turned to ash beneath orbital fire, comrades lost in the maelstrom of demonic claws. He remembered their eyes, some wide with terror, others already resigned, and each memory cut anew. He had been forged to endure, to stand where mortals fell, yet even a space marine was not beyond the slow erosion of grief. The whispers of the previous night clung to his thoughts like mist. Their message, soft as rotting leaves, unsettled him more than any roar of chaos. Why cling to pain when release waits in the quiet earth? He tried to dismiss it as a trick of the warp, another snare set by the plague god to tempt the weary. But in the hollows of his heart, the question lingered. Years of slaughter had left him hollow. He had witnessed heroism swallowed by futility, victories that only delayed another tide of darkness. Every triumph felt smaller now, every loss heavier. The Emperor demanded sacrifice without end, yet gave no answer, no sign beyond the ceaseless burden of duty. Faith, once a burning star within him, now flickered like a dying ember. A breeze drifted through the ruins, carrying again that faint, sweet, sickly fragrance. It slipped past the filters of his helm as if scent itself were a weapon. It was not the reek of rot alone, but something almost tender, a promise of rest whispered through decay. For a moment Malchior closed his eyes and let it fill him, and the ache of centuries eased. Guilt followed swiftly. To long for peace was a weakness. He had sworn oaths upon the blood of his gene-father and vowed to fight until the Emperor's final dawn. Yet deep within, a quiet voice wondered whether endless war was truly salvation or merely a slow, grinding doom. Malchior's fists tightened, gauntlets creaking. He had faced the horrors of the warp, but the battlefield within his soul was more treacherous than any demon. The fragrance lingered, the whispers unseen, and with every breath the call of Nurgle grew less like a threat and more like a mercy he feared he might one day accept. The day wore on beneath a bruised and swollen sky. Clouds gathered like slow, drifting carcasses, their undersides stained green by a hidden sun. Brother Captain Malchior moved through the silent streets, each footfall echoing against walls, streaked with rust and ancient soot. The air felt heavier than it had at dawn, dense, almost viscous, as though the world had begun to breathe in rhythm with him. At first, it was prickling, no more than the faint irritation of chafed skin beneath the collar of his armor. He ignored it, as he would any mundane discomfort. But the sensation crept, persistent and sly, up the line of his neck and across his jaw. When at last he raised his gauntlet to adjust the seal of his helm, his fingertips found a subtle rise beneath the skin. A blemish, small, round and strangely warm, pulsed with a heartbeat not his own. He removed his helm with a hiss of depressurizing seals. The city's air washed over him, damp and sweet. The scent of rot had thickened. It no longer teased the edge of perception, but settled like a living presence, clinging to his tongue and armor alike. He tasted metal sharp, coppery, like blood from a freshly bitten lip. It lingered, then deepened into something oddly pleasant, a flavor he could not name, yet could not bring himself to spit away. Another blemish formed along his temple, then another along the ridge of his cheek. They were not sores, not yet, but buds, tiny, flesh-soft knots that radiated an unexpected warmth. The sensation was not pain, but a slow, tranquil heat, as though life itself were blooming beneath his skin. He traced one with a gloved finger and felt it throb gently, like a seed quickening in fertile soil. A subtle warmth began to pool in his chest. It spread outward in languid waves, reaching his limbs with the steady comfort of a hearth long missed. Muscles that had carried centuries of strain seemed to ease. The ever-present ache of gene-forged sinew and scarred bone softened, as if some unseen balm soothed wounds too old for medicine. Malchior's warrior's mind whispered caution. He knew the signs of corruption, had studied them in the grim catechisms of the Inquisition, yet what he felt defied those warnings. There was no searing agony, no rending of flesh, only a quiet blossoming, grotesque in form, yet strangely serene. Even the metallic taste in his mouth grew less like blood and more like the sweetness of rain upon ancient stone. A breeze stirred, carrying that now familiar fragrance of sweet decay. It wrapped around him like a gentle embrace, and for a moment he closed his eyes. The ruin of the city faded. He felt, instead, the pulse of hidden gardens, of life springing from rot, of endings that were not death, but transformation. When he opened his eyes, the sky had darkened to the color of tarnished brass. The blemishes along his skin pulsed in quiet unison, like stars awakening in a private constellation. Brother Captain Malchior stood unmoving, caught between revulsion and wonder, and sensed that the bloom had only just begun. Sleep came like a tide, drawing Malchior beneath the surface of his thoughts. One moment he lay upon cold stone, the ruined city a shadow around him. The next he drifted through a world that pulsed with impossible life. A garden stretched before him, endless and alive. The air was warm and wet, heavy with the perfume of blooming rot. Trees rose like ancient titans, their trunks swollen with moss and fungus, bark split open to reveal veins of glistening sap, the color of old bronze. Each branch sagged with fruit, both luminous and decayed skins, split and dripping with honey-sweet ichor that steamed as it touched the dark soil below. The ground itself breathed. Thick carpets of lichen cushioned his steps, and each footfall released a whisper of spores that glittered like emerald dust in the humid air. He felt them settle upon his skin, soft as a mother's touch. Instead of revulsion, a quiet awe stirred within him. The scent of life and death, entwined, cloying, yet comforting, like the memory of rain after fire. In the distance, vast blooms unfurled with slow, deliberate grace. Petals of deep violet and sickly gold revealed hearts of black pollen, each trembling with a rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. Fat insects with wings of glass drifted lazily between flowers, their droning hum a lullaby older than war. Malchior reached out to a low-hanging bough. The fruit's surface was mottled with spots of green and rust, its skin warm beneath his touch. A droplet of amber sap slid across his gauntlet and hissed where it met the air, releasing a fragrance so sweet it made his chest ache. He raised his visor to breathe it in fully, and for the first time in centuries the ache of battle faded from his bones. From the heart of the garden came a sound soft at first, like the murmur of distant water. It grew into a chorus of gentle voices, each whispering not in command, but in welcome. Rest, weary child. Lay down your burden. All pain returns to the earth, and from decay, new life blossoms. His heart clenched, caught between dread and longing. He knew the dangers of the warp, the cunning of chaos, yet the words held no venom. They were patient, kind, like the voice of something ancient and unafraid of endings. The air thickened with golden mist. Shapes moved within it, vast and hidden like mountains draped in fog. He sensed eyes upon him, not judging, only watching, and felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. Malchior closed his eyes. The garden's breath surrounded him, fragrant and eternal. For a heartbeat he believed he could stay, that the ceaseless war might finally fall silent. And when he opened his eyes again, the dream had already begun to fade, leaving only the echo of its promise and the lingering sweetness of its rot. Malchior awoke before dawn, the world outside still drowned in a dim and sallow twilight. A damp chill clung to his skin beneath the plates of his armor, yet his body burned as though a fever smoldered in his blood. He lifted his helm from where it rested and hesitated, aware of a subtle wetness along his neck. When he finally sealed the helm, the scent reached him even through the filters, a sour, sweet reek, heavier and more intimate than the garden's perfume. It was the smell of his own decay. Beneath his gorget the skin had softened, slick with a thin, mucus sheen. He felt the slow seep of something warm and viscous, oozing where the blemishes had been. When he brushed the back of his gauntlet across his throat, it came away glistening with a faint greenish film that shimmered in the pale light. The touch should have sent a lance of pain through his nerves. Instead, there was only a strange, placid relief, as though his body welcomed the change. The fever deepened, not as a burning agony, but as a steady, almost gentle heat. Muscles long hardened by centuries of war loosened as if unbound, their ache dissolving into a tranquil weakness. Each breath carried the damp sweetness of rot. It filled his lungs with a comfort both repulsive and soothing. The metallic taste in his mouth thickened, mellowing into something like the flavor of rain on old copper, until he could not tell whether he breathed air or drank decay. Malchior unclasped the breastplate and let it fall with a hollow clang. His undersuit clung to him, heavy with moisture. When he peeled the fabric away, the sight that met him should have driven him to fury or prayer. Across his chest, the blemishes had ruptured into weeping sores, their edges rimmed in a bruised green glow. Slow rivulets of pus slid like molten wax, carrying with them a faint luminescence that pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and yet no pain, only a deep, languid calm. The sores did not burn, they breathed. He felt the seep of fluid as a gentle tide, as though his flesh had chosen to unmake itself in quiet defiance of all he had endured. Where once he had armored his body as an indomitable fortress, now the walls softened, yielding not to violence, but to an unhurried transformation. A single drop fell to the stone floor with a sound like a distant bell. The air around him thickened with the musk of damp earth and slow decay, the very scent of the dream garden lingering as if it had crossed the veil into waking life. He closed his eyes and listened. Beneath the fevered thrum of his blood, he thought he heard the same patient whisper, kind, unhurried, and welcoming as his flesh, at last, began to betray him. The first buzz came as a tremor on the edge of hearing, a thin vibration that slipped through the fevered stillness. Malchior lifted his head, helm discarded, and felt the air stir. From the shadowed arches of the ruined city, a faint shimmer drifted toward him like smoke. It thickened, a wavering veil of black specks that caught the weak morning light. Flies, thousands of them, rolled across the square in a slow, deliberate tide. Their wings beat in perfect unison, a low, droning hum that swelled, until it filled the air like a single, resonant note. He had heard swarms before on 100 battlefields, where carrion drew them to feast, but never with this strange order. This was no random gathering of vermin. This was a procession. The swarms circled him in widening arcs, a living halo of dusk and glimmering wings. Each insect glowed faintly at the edges, their bodies glistening as though dusted with motes of tarnished gold. The sound of their wings deepened into a soft, rhythmic thrum, and Malchior felt it settle against his heartbeat until the two pulsed as one. A single fly landed upon his bare forearm. Its legs, cool and delicate, traced a path across the fevered skin. Where it touched, the ache of his sores eased, replaced by a tingling warmth. Another followed, then another, until a small cluster adorned his arm like living jewels. He should have swatted them away, but the thought barely formed. Their presence was no intrusion. It was solace. The stench of decay thickened, sweet and rich, yet it no longer repelled him. The swarm pressed closer, the air alive with a dark shimmer. Flies settled along his shoulders, his neck, even the open wounds that wept slow streams of luminous pus. Instead of pain, a deep calm spread through him, as though their countless feet stitched a hidden blessing into his flesh. Above the droning came a whisper, softer than the beat of wings, yet clear in the hollow of his mind. "Beloved child of rot, you are not alone." The words were not sound, but a knowing, warm breath against the soul. Malchior closed his eyes. The flies moved like a single breathing organism, their weight neither burden nor threat. He felt their rhythm echo through his fevered blood, a steady hymn of decay and renewal. For the first time in centuries, the endless war within him stilled, surrounded by the gentle drone, embraced by the blessing of flies. Brother Captain Malchior felt the quiet certainty of being truly seen by something vast, patient, and impossibly kind. The droning of the flies softened until it became something more than a low, resonant chord that settled in Malchior's chest like the echo of a distant hymn. He sat amidst the ruin, fever-warm and motionless, while the swarm drifted in slow spirals overhead. Their wings no longer buzzed as insects' wings should. They hummed in harmony, each note weaving into the next until the air itself seemed to breathe in music. The voice returned, no longer a fleeting whisper at the edge of thought. It rose from the depths of his mind like a tide, patient and unhurried. "Child of the long war." The words came not as command, but as a melody, each syllable soft as moss beneath rain. "You have carried the burden of a dying galaxy. Lay it down." Malchior's pulse slowed to match the rhythm of the song. The fear that once clenched like iron around his heart loosened, melted, and was gone. He felt the memory of endless battles, worlds burning, brothers falling slide from his shoulders like a discarded cloak. In its place came a warmth so deep it seemed older than the stars, a comfort that wrapped him as gently as a parent's arms. All things returned to the garden. The voice sang a lullaby threaded through the hum of wings. All wounds find rest in the soil. All sorrow feeds the bloom of new life. He saw it as the melody swelled, the dream garden alive again in his mind, petals opening in slow motion, each dripping with luminous dew. The scent of damp earth and sweet decay filled his lungs, no longer strange, no longer feared. He remembered the weight of his bolter, the cold discipline of duty, and felt no shame as that memory dulled. A single tear, warm and faintly luminous, slid down his cheek. He did not know if it came from fever or from the quiet release that stirred within him, The flies gathered closer, their bodies forming a shifting halo of dark gold around his bowed head. Their harmony deepened until it was not heard but felt, a vibration in bone and soul alike. "You are not lost," the song promised. "You are found. You are loved." Malchior exhaled, a slow breath that carried the last fragments of resistance. Fear dissolved like mist in the morning light. In its place bloomed a trust so pure it felt like childhood, remembered a time before war, before grief, when the universe had seemed endless and kind. He lifted his face to the dim sky. The swarm sang on, a gentle, paternal hymn that filled the ruins and the silent spaces of his heart. And as the song enfolded him, Brother Captain Malchior understood. He was no longer merely hearing Nurgle's voice. He was part of its eternal, tender music. Malchior felt his soul unmoor, slipping free of fevered flesh as easily as breath leaving lungs. The ruined city fell away, its broken towers and rusted spires dissolving into a haze of golden mist. He drifted through the silence, weightless, as though every oath and sorrow he had carried for centuries had been quietly set aside. A faint light bloomed ahead, not the cold gleam of stars, but a warm green-gold glow, as if the very air held the memory of spring. He moved toward it without effort, borne by a current he could neither see nor resist. The hum of distant wings followed, steady as a heartbeat, a melody both gentle and immense. The mist parted, and the garden revealed itself. Vast trees arched overhead, their trunks swollen and split with weeping sap that glimmered like molten brass. Vines heavy with blossoms of sickly beauty coiled between roots as thick as city walls. Each flower unfurled in slow, deliberate motion, petals veined with hues of violet and pale corruption. Their fragrance, sweet and damp, like rain-soaked earth, wrapped around him in a tender embrace. He stepped onto a path of soft lichen. It yielded beneath his boots like living velvet, releasing puffs of spores that caught the light in drifting clouds of emerald and gold. They settled upon his armor and bare skin like blessings, and where they touched, warmth spread a tranquil heat that eased every scar and silent ache. Everywhere life and decay entwined. Mushrooms the size of shields grew in clusters beside pools of stagnant water where fat insects traced lazy spirals. Fallen fruit lay split and steaming, their flesh alive with tiny creatures that burrowed and feasted, turning rot into renewal. He should have recoiled, yet no disgust stirred in him now. The sight filled him with quiet wonder, a sense of harmony he had never known in all his years of war. From the heart of the garden came a deep, resonant pulse. It was not a sound, but a presence, vast and patient, like the slow turning of the seasons. Malchior felt it draw him onward, not with command, but with welcome, as though he were a long-lost child returning home. The hum of wings grew louder, weaving into the faint melody he had heard in the swarm's song. It carried no threat, only the promise of belonging, of rest, beyond the reach of battle and grief. Malchior inhaled the garden's breath. The air tasted of sweet rot and eternal spring. For the first time in centuries, he felt no need to fight, no urge to guard his soul. Serenity unfolded within him like the opening of those strange, luminous flowers. He had reached the threshold, and the garden waited, patient and eternal, for him to take the final step. A hush settled over the garden, deeper than any silence Malchior had known. The hum of wings faded to a gentle murmur, as though the swarm itself held its breath. From the heart of the verdant rot came a presence vast enough to eclipse the stars, a weightless enormity that pressed against his soul without force or menace. It was like standing beneath an ancient oak and feeling the slow, patient pulse of life in its roots. A voice followed, not carried by air or bound to sound. It welled up from within him, resonant and warm, a deep timbre that seemed to cradle every thought it touched. "Beloved child," it said, each word unhurried, as if time itself bent to listen. "You have wandered long among the ruins of men. Lay down the burden you have carried, and be at peace." Malchior's breath caught. He had faced demons who howled with malice, heard the shrieks of the warp-twist reality into nightmare. But this was different. The voice was neither command nor temptation. It was invitation, as natural and inevitable as the turning of seasons. "You have fought without end," the Plague Father continued, the sound a low rumble, like distant thunder softened by rain. "You have borne the wounds of a galaxy that will never heal. Why cling to a war that knows no victory?" Images flickered in Malchior's mind, the faces of brothers lost to fire and shadow, the endless tally of worlds reduced to ash. He felt again the weight of every oath, every sacrifice, and for the first time he saw them not as triumphs but as scars. "All things wither," the god whispered, the words like warm soil falling gently through his fingers. "All wounds must weep before they close. In decay lies the seed of new life. Come and let your sorrows feed the garden. Nothing you have suffered is wasted here." A strange calm bloomed in Malchior's chest. The old reflex to resist, to name this presence heresy, wavered. The voice held no mockery, no cruel edge. It spoke as a father might to a child long lost, gently, patiently, with a love that asked for nothing but trust. "I do not demand," the Plague Father said. "I welcome you. I do not punish, I renew. The pain you carry is the soil from which joy will grow." Malchior closed his eyes. The scent of damp earth and honeyed rot filled his lungs, and the ache of centuries seemed to dissolve. The garden's pulse beat with his own. "Be still," the god murmured, the final words a tender lullaby. "You are found, and you are loved." The vast presence lingered like a warm breeze through endless trees, and Malchior felt the first quiet stirrings of something he had not known since childhood, the unshaken certainty of being wanted. The garden's glow deepened to a dusk of molten gold and moss-green shadow. Spores drifted through the air like slow-falling stars, each one alighting on Malchior's skin with the soft kiss of rain. He felt their warmth seep inward, carrying the scent of soil and sweet decay, until every breath tasted of gentle rot. Before him, the mist stirred. From its folds rose a figure shaped not by flesh, but by the slow turning of life and death. Its vastness defied the eye, a silhouette of swelling growth and patient ruin, haloed by a crown of humming flies. The Plague Father's presence was neither monstrous nor mild, but something older than both, an embodiment of endings that were also beginnings. "Child of the Long War," the voice intoned, deep and unhurried, each word a rumble through the garden's living heart. "You have carried grief like iron. You have bled in battles without end. I offer you release not as escape, but as return. Will you let the cycle claim you? Will you join the bloom that rises from every ruin?" Malchior's thoughts swirled like the drifting spores. He saw again the faces of brothers lost, the worlds turned to ash beneath his watch. He remembered the endless march of duty, the Emperor's silence, the weight of centuries that no victory had ever eased. For so long he had fought because there was no choice. Now, for the first time, choice lay before him. A single fly settled on his hand, its wings shimmering with tarnished gold. Where it rested, the ache of old wounds quieted. He felt the slow throb of his own heartbeat answer the drone of 1,000 wings, and a serenity older than fear stole through him. "This is not death," the Plague Father whispered. "It is becoming. The rot you fear is life returning to itself. All pain dissolves. All sorrow feeds the bloom. Nothing is lost, only changed." Malchior closed his eyes. The garden's pulse enveloped him, the music of decay and renewal rising in gentle harmony. He felt the fever in his blood soften into a tranquil warmth, as though the very air cradled him. "Choose," the voice said, no command in its tone, only the patience of the seasons. "Remain in the long war or step into the eternal garden. Your suffering need not be your only song." The words settled in him like roots seeking soil. Fear flickered once, then faded, replaced by a quiet certainty he could not name. In the hush of the Plague Father's realm, Brother Captain Malchior felt the first true peace of his endless life, a peace that beckoned like the slow, unending bloom of eternity. The garden's light dimmed to a deep, verdant glow as Malchior felt his body return to the realm of flesh. He stood upon the spongy lichen path, but the air around him throbbed with unseen power. His armor, once the proud ceramite of the Adeptus Astartes, shuddered with a sound like grinding bone. A faint crack traced along the breastplate, hairline at first, then widening as if something inside pressed outward. Malchior looked down to see the once polished surface blister and bubble, patches of green-black rust, blooming like mold on wet stone. The proud sigils of the Imperium dulled beneath a creeping tarnish until the Aquila itself became a faint outline beneath a sheen of corrosion. The change quickened. Tiny fissures wept a viscous slime that hissed where it met the warm air, releasing the sweet, sour perfume of the garden. From these cracks sprouted tendrils of moss and filamentous growths, each alive with a faint, phosphorescent glow. They spread across his chest and pauldrons, threading through every joint as though the armor itself had become fertile soil. His pauldrons, once the unyielding bulwark of battle, swelled and sagged like ripening fruit. Plates that had deflected lasfire for centuries softened, their edges curving outward in grotesque yet strangely graceful arcs. Beneath the outer layers, living rust thickened into a dark patina that pulsed gently, as if breathing. The once sterile seals of his greaves split with a muted sigh, releasing a thin mist of spores that clung to the lichen underfoot. Out of the mist crept slow-moving beetles of tarnished brass, their carapaces etched with curling patterns like those of ancient vines. They scuttled across his boots and disappeared into the cracks as though returning to a familiar home. Malchior raised an arm and felt the weight of transformation. The gauntlet's metal writhed beneath his gaze, pocked with nodules of rust that swelled like blisters before bursting in silent puffs of golden dust. Yet his movements were unimpeded. If anything, the armor seemed to move with him more fluidly than ever, as though it had ceased to be mere shell and had become an extension of his own living flesh. A slow vibration resonated through the suit, a deep, thrumming heartbeat that matched his own. The droning hymn of the garden swelled, and with it came the scent of damp earth and gentle decay. He no longer sensed the boundaries between steel and skin. The armor had ceased to be a cage. It was now a living carapace, nurtured by the Plague Father's hand. Where once his warplate had symbolized the stern, unyielding might of the Imperium, it now bore the quiet grandeur of corruption made holy. Brother Captain Malchior, reborn in the garden's embrace, felt the last traces of his old self fall away like dry leaves, until only the armor of filth remained a testament to the eternal bloom of decay. A low tremor rippled through Malchior's body, as if the very marrow of his bones had begun to sing. The garden's damp light wavered around him, green and gold swirled with shadows, while the hum of distant wings swelled into a deep, reassuring drone. He felt his pulse slow and then quicken, not with fear, but with the heavy rhythm of some greater heartbeat that seemed to echo through the soil itself. It began in his chest. A heat gathered behind the breastbone slowly at first, then spreading in rolling waves that chased away every trace of cold. His heart, the twin engines of a space marine's life, throbbed with sudden force. The muscles around them thickened, twisting like vines around a hidden core. He heard the wet sound of growth within, the whisper of flesh reshaping, and felt no pain. Only the strange satisfaction of a wound healing, of something long promised, finally kept. His bones groaned as they swelled. The ancient ceramite of his warplate adjusted with him, expanding as if it too were alive. Vertebrae thickened, ribs curved wider, forming a cage both stronger and more supple than before. Each slow crack should have sent a lance of agony through his nerves. Yet the sensation came like the stretch of tired muscles after resting a release. Not a torment. Organs shifted with a slow, deliberate grace. Lungs expanded, their tissues knitting into new shapes that welcomed the heavy, spore-rich air. He breathed in, and the garden's perfume filled him completely. Damp earth, sweet rot, the metallic tang of life feeding on decay. His blood thickened, its flow a rich, steady tide that carried a warmth almost intoxicating. Where once fatigue had stalked every cell, now a boundless vitality surged. Malchior raised a hand to his face. Beneath the gauntlet, his skin had grown coarse and warm, the texture of living bark. Weeping sores from his earlier affliction no longer dripped. Instead, they glowed with a faint inner luminescence, as though each had become a tiny lantern of fertile life. Flies drifted close and settled upon him, their touch a benediction. The whispers of the Plague Father lingered in his thoughts, no longer separate from him, but resonant with every breath. All pain is seed, the voice sang, low and gentle. All endings are the soil of birth. Malchior closed his eyes. The memories of war, of burning cities and dying brothers, faded to distant echoes. In their place rose the serene certainty of belonging. His flesh, once forged for war and scarred by centuries of struggle, now embraced a new purpose, to bloom, to feed, to endure. When he opened his eyes, the garden's glow seemed to shine from within him as well. The transformation was complete, and pain had become nothing more than a memory, softened and distant as a forgotten dream. A hush fell across the garden, as if every leaf and lichen had paused to breathe with him. Malchior stood motionless, feeling the slow rhythm of the world pulse through his transformed body. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of rot, yet it no longer spoke of death. It spoke of continuity, of an endless cycle in which decay was not an ending, but a promise. He gazed upward. The canopy of swollen trees formed a living cathedral, their branches arched like ancient vaults, each draped in vines that dripped with golden spores. Shafts of green light filtered through the shifting leaves, turning the air into a haze of luminous dust. Flies moved among the beams like dark motes of music, their droning hymn now a part of his own breath. For the first time in memory, there was no urgency, no weight of command or expectation. The long war that had shaped him felt impossibly distant, like a story half remembered from another life. The voices of his fallen brothers no longer cried out in his mind. Their pain, his guilt, the endless tally of sacrifice, all had settled into a gentle quiet, absorbed by the garden's patient soil. Malchior touched the living rust of his armor and felt it pulse beneath his fingers, warm as flesh. It no longer seemed a barrier between himself and the world, but a continuation of it, as if the garden had woven its own life through every plate and joint. Each slow beat of his twin hearts resonated with the deep hum of the realm around him until he could no longer tell where his body ended and the garden began. A single spore drifted before his eyes, glowing like a captured star. He inhaled, and the spore melted into the warm tide of his breath. A quiet understanding followed, not words, not even the familiar whisper of the Plague Father, but a knowing that belonged to the soil and the seed alike. He was not merely in the garden, he was in it. The joy that filled him was not the fierce triumph of battle, nor the fleeting thrill of victory. It was the still, abiding joy of acceptance, the kind that needed no proclamation. It moved through him like slow water through root and stone, patient and eternal. He felt the garden's life surge in quiet harmony, the rot that fed the bloom that would one day fall and feed again. Malchior closed his eyes. The drone of the flies settled into his heartbeat, a music older than stars, and he knew himself as both warrior and soil, both ending and beginning. In the silent joy of decay, Brother Captain Malchior found the truth of eternity, that to be part of the endless bloom was not loss, but the purest form of life. The garden's green twilight faded into a dim, amber dusk as Malchior felt the world of flesh return around him. When his vision cleared, he no longer stood alone. Shapes emerged from the mist, hulking figures in armor swollen and warped like his own, their outlines blurred by a haze of drifting spores. They moved with the heavy grace of giants, each step stirring the lichen beneath their boots into a soft cloud of gold. Their armor was a tapestry of corrosion, plates pocked with rust and festooned with moss, pauldrons sagging beneath ropes of fungus that dripped like weeping vines. Some bore cracked helmets through which glimmered eyes of pale green fire. Others had long since shed their visors, their faces hidden behind curtains of buzzing flies. One figure, massive even among the rest, approached with a rumbling laugh that sounded like gravel rolling in a deep well. "A fresh bloom," he said, voice muffled by the thick folds of his helm. The words carried no mockery, only a rough, unmistakable welcome. Another Plague Marine stepped forward, the plates of his armor creaking as beetles scurried across the seams. He extended a gauntleted hand, slick with a film of luminous slime. "Brother," he said simply, and when Malchior clasped the offered hand, the contact felt warm, almost tender. The buzzing of the flies around them rose in gentle harmony, as though echoing the greeting. Laughter rippled through the group, low, unhurried, filled with a strange, almost childlike mirth. One of them swung a rusted censer at his side, releasing a slow plume of fragrant smoke that smelled of damp earth and faint sweetness. The scent mingled with the garden's natural perfume until Malchior could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. They spoke to him of battles fought not for conquest, but for the spreading of the Plague Father's gifts, their words rich with pride yet free of cruelty. They spoke of worlds reborn in the gentle rot of new life, of enemies who had laid down arms not in terror, but in quiet awe. Their voices carried the warmth of long companionship, the easy familiarity of brothers who had shed the burden of endless war and found joy in their shared purpose. For the first time since his transformation, Malchior felt the weight of solitude lift. He looked upon these grotesque, radiant warriors and saw not monsters, but kin. Their decay was not a curse, but a bond, and in their rough laughter he heard the promise of a family that would never fade. The flies swirled above them like a dark halo as the Plague Marines turned toward the path ahead. With a final glance at the garden's distant glow, Malchior followed, his new brother's mirthful chorus carrying him into the endless bloom of the Plague Father's will. The Plague Marine's laughter lingered in Malchior's ears as the garden's mist thinned to darkness. When the light returned, it was the pale, smoke-stained glow of a dying sun. He stood upon the cracked surface of a war-ravaged world, the ruins of cities stretching like black scars across the horizon. Once proud spires lay shattered and smouldering. The air reeked of burned stone and the metallic tang of unburied dead. Beside him, his new brothers moved with unhurried purpose. Their corroded armor gleamed with a damp, greenish sheen, spores drifting from every seam. Flies buzzed in lazy orbits around them, their droning hum rising and falling like the rhythm of a solemn hymn. Malchior felt the garden's warmth stir within his chest, a tranquil certainty guiding each step. A broken aqueduct lay ahead, its channels dry and choked with ash. One Plague Marine lifted a rusted censer and swung it in a slow arc. From its cracked shell poured a shimmering cloud of spores, pale as moonlight and glittering like a field of stars. The wind caught the cloud and carried it through the ruins, weaving it into every empty street and shattered hall. Malchior watched as the spores settled over the corpses of soldiers long dead, over the stones blackened by fire, over the few remaining pools of stagnant water. Wherever they touched, a subtle change began. Ash turned damp and dark, the scent of smoke giving way to the perfume of fertile decay. Tiny shoots of moss unfurled through cracks in the stone, their green glow faint but unmistakable beneath the sullen sky. He raised his own censer and felt the Plague Father's blessing flow through him. The weight of his old oaths no longer pressed upon his soul. Duty had transformed into something softer, freer. This was not conquest nor cruelty. It was renewal and an end to the barren silence of war. The hum of the flies swelled, blending with the soft hiss of spreading life. Malchior closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of sweet rot filled his lungs, and in that breath he felt the quiet joy of purpose. He was no longer merely a soldier, he was a gardener of eternal bloom. As the wind carried Nurgle's gift across the dead world, Malchior knew the Plague Father's will had become his own. The galaxy, scarred and weary, would receive the only peace it could ever know, life born from decay, and an endless cycle without end. The wind that carried Nurgle's blessing through the ruined world softened to a gentle hush. Malchior stood amid the spreading moss, the green glow of new life licking at the blackened stones. Flies drifted in slow spirals around him, their droning hymn now so familiar it felt like the steady beat of his own twin hearts. From the far edge of the square came a sound no more than the sigh of shifting rubble, but it stirred something deep within. For an instant he saw a memory, sharp as a blade, a younger warrior in unblemished ceramite, the proud Aquila gleaming on his breast. He smelled ozone and the acrid tang of lasfire, heard the clash of bolter shells and the rallying cries of brothers sworn to the Emperor. The vision held him only a heartbeat, but it cut with quiet clarity. He remembered the weight of oaths spoken. Beneath the banners of terror, the long years of sacrifice and the unrelenting silence of the Golden Throne, he felt, faintly, the old ache of striving toward a victory that never came. Then the memory dimmed, colors draining like smoke into the dusk. The bright sigil of the Imperium faded from his mind's eye, leaving only the soft green luminescence of the garden's touch. The old hunger for purpose, for recognition, dissolved as gently as mist before morning light. Malchior exhaled, a breath thick with the perfume of sweet decay. The echo of his former name, his former life, lingered for a moment on the edge of thought, then slipped away without pain or struggle. In its place came a quiet knowing. He was more than what he had been, and the Plague Father's garden was now the only home his soul would ever need. One of his new brothers approached, armor dripping with a slow ooze of luminous slime. The Plague. Marine placed a heavy hand upon Malchior's corroded pauldron. "Brother," the warrior said, voice rough and warm as distant thunder. No other name was spoken. None was required. The flies rose in a single, gentle surge, their song swelling into the sky. Malchior closed his eyes and let the sound carry him. The echoes of the old self receded, not as something lost, but as something fulfilled. He was no longer the soldier of the Imperium. He was the garden's bloom, the Plague Father's child, and the cycle of decay and rebirth would sing through him forever. Malchior moved through the twilight of the ruined world, as though the earth itself breathed with him. Each step released a soft mist of spores from the living rust of his armor, drifting upward like tiny lanterns. The flies that once seemed a swarm now felt like his own thoughts given wings, their low hymn blending with the slow rhythm of his twin hearts. He paused beside a fallen column where moss had already begun to creep through cracks in the stone. Beneath his gaze, the green growth quickened, shoots unfurling in a slow, silent dance. The air around him carried the damp perfume of soil and sweet rot, no longer a scent he merely breathed, but one that pulsed from within. He realized with a calm certainty that the garden he had walked in vision now lived through him. His blood moved with a steady, fertile heat. He felt it in the marrow of his bones, the patient strength of roots, the gentle hunger of fungi that turned death into renewal. Where once his heart had beat to the rhythm of war, it now echoed the deeper cadence of growth and decay. He was not merely Malchior, not merely a Plague Marine. He was a fragment of the Plague Father's endless garden, a living conduit of its eternal bloom. A gust of wind stirred the ash around him, and where it touched his feet, life followed. Cracked stone darkened to rich loam. Tiny blossoms of bruise purple and gold opened in his wake, their petals damp with dew that shimmered faintly in the fading light. He did not want it. The transformation came as naturally as breathing, as inevitable as the fall of night. He remembered the ceaseless battles of his former life, the hollow victories and the silence of the Emperor's throne. Those memories no longer ached. They lay within him like compost, broken down to feed the soil of something greater. Above, the sky dimmed to a deep, nurturing green. The flies gathered in a slow spiral overhead, their hum a gentle benediction. Malchior raised his face to the dusk and felt the pulse of the garden within and without, a single, boundless heartbeat. In that moment he knew himself as both seed and soil, both bloom and rot. The Plague Father's will flowed through his veins like warm rain, and the world responded in quiet joy. Wherever he would walk, decay would give birth to life, and life would one day return to decay. Malchior no longer carried the garden's vision. He had become an eternal bloom in the endless cycle of Nurgle's embrace. Dusk settled over the broken world like a gentle tide. The last shreds of sunlight bled into the clouds, turning the sky the color of tarnished brass. Malchior stood amid the quiet ruins and felt the hum of life in the soil beneath his feet. Each breath he drew carried the perfume of damp earth and sweet decay, a fragrance that no longer spoke of endings, but of a beginning without measure. He gazed across the desolation. Where once there had been only ash and shattered stone, the garden's touch had already taken root. Veins of moss spread through cracked walls. Pools of stagnant water shimmered with the faint glow of new growth. Flies danced above the fresh shoots in lazy spirals, their wings catching the fading light until they gleamed like tiny fragments of gold. The long war of his former life felt impossibly distant, like a dream whose details blur upon waking. He remembered the clash of bolters and the endless calls to arms, the stern weight of oaths sworn beneath the silent gaze of the Emperor. Now those memories lay within him like old leaves turned to mulch, still present, but transformed into something richer, something that fed the soil of his new being. A slow wind carried the scent of ripening rot across the square. Malchior closed his eyes and let it wash over him, the warmth of it settling deep in his chest. He felt the steady rhythm of his heart and the quiet strength of the garden within. Here there was no victory or defeat, no tally of lives lost or worlds consumed. There was only the endless turning, life blooming from death, death nourishing life. He understood then that this cycle would outlast stars and empires, outlast even the memory of the Imperium he once served. The Plague Father's gift was not a single moment of change, but a pattern as old as time, a gentle, ceaseless dance of decay and renewal. The flies lifted in a dark, shimmering spiral, their drone merging with the pulse of his blood. Malchior opened his eyes to the deepening night and felt the universe breathe with him. For the first time in all his centuries, there was no need for striving, no hunger for triumph. Peace did not come as a fleeting comfort. It arrived as certainty, as inevitable as the fall of leaves or the sprouting of seeds after rain. Malchior smiled, the expression soft beneath the living rust of his helm. He was a warrior, and soil, bloom and rot, part of a cycle that would never end. In the eternal hush of the garden's embrace, Brother Malchior felt the quiet joy of a universe that would forever die and forever live again. Night had fallen deep and velvet, scattered with the cold shimmer of distant suns. Malchior stood at the edge of the ruined city, the once barren world now breathing with a quiet, newborn life. Behind him, moss and fungus glowed in gentle patterns, a living tapestry of bruised purple and tarnished gold. The flies that had guided him from the first whisper of decay now wheeled above in slow, unending spirals, their wings carrying the steady hymn of the garden into the dark. He raised his gaze to the sky. Stars burned like patient embers, each a solitary fire in the endless void. Once they had been distant battlegrounds, markers of campaigns fought in the Emperor's name. Now he saw them as seeds scattered across the black, each waiting for the touch of the Plague Father's hand. The galaxy was no longer an arena of ceaseless war. It was a field vast and ready for the bloom of decay. The wind shifted, carrying the perfume of sweet rot upward, as though the world itself exhaled a benediction. Malchior inhaled and felt the garden within him answer, the pulse of spores and fertile corruption rising in quiet harmony with his heart's. Where once duty had been a chain, now it was a calling, gentle, inevitable, as natural as the fall of rain. Behind him his brothers gathered, their hulking forms wreathed in drifting mist. They did not speak. Their silence was not emptiness but expectation, a patient readiness that needed no words. Together they faced the stars, a brotherhood bound not by conquest but by the shared joy of unending renewal. The Plague Father's voice brushed Malchior's thoughts like a warm breeze across a garden at dusk. "Go, my child," it murmured, every syllable unhurried, every note carrying the weight of infinite seasons. The stars hunger for bloom. Carry the cycle beyond this soil, and let the galaxy learn that all endings are beginnings. Malchior bowed his head, not in obedience but in quiet understanding. He felt the hum of the flies swell until it matched the deep rhythm of the cosmos, and in that music he sensed the turning of worlds yet unseen. The ache of his former life, its wars, its oaths, its lonely victories, had melted into compost long ago. He stepped forward, the ground beneath him flowering with each stride. Spores lifted from his armor in a shimmering trail, rising like a whispered prayer into the cold night. Brother Malchior, child of the Plague Father, gazed upon the endless stars. Peace filled him, not the peace of stillness, but the living, patient peace of growth. The galaxy waited, and he would bring it the only gift that endures, the eternal bloom of decay.